Hi, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Ashley Anneton, and I'm a program officer here at ACYPL. Today is the final town hall in a three-part series focused on the American education system and the impact of and response to COVID-19. Last week, our panelists discussed lessons learned from their first phase of distance learning after the initial shutdown, the methodology behind teacher and student assessments, as well as budgetary concerns for the upcoming academic year. And the week before that, we tackled inequities within the education system that was exacerbated and exposed by COVID-19. With the beginning of the school year quickly approaching and many districts planning to return to some version of school next month, today's discussion will be focused on what the future of K-12 education looks like during COVID-19. What are the new and evolving responsibilities of the public and private institutions at this time? And finally, we'll examine how the pandemic's resulting economic downturn has impacted education funding. But before we get started, I want to introduce our wonderful alumni panelists. First, we have Kobe Koash, who is the Government Relations Director for the Nebraska Association of School Boards and a former member of the Nebraska Legislature, who traveled with ACYPL to China in 2010 and Brazil in 2017. We have Chelsea King, who is the Vice Chair of the West Linn Wilsonville School Board in Oregon. She's also a communication coach and organizational development consult at Heart Centered Work, a company she founded in 2007. She traveled on the delegation to Brazil in 2017, and Quentin Phipps, who is the Director of Advocacy and Policy for the Excellence Community School Organization and serves as a member of the Connecticut House of Representatives. He traveled with ACYPL to Russia in 2016. Welcome, everyone. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. So first, I just wanted to allow you all to introduce yourselves. Kobe, would you get started for us?
I sure will. Good afternoon, everybody. It is afternoon here in Nebraska. As Ashley said, my name's Colby. I've had a very storied career in politics and now in education. I served in the Nebraska state legislature for 8 years. We have term limits there, so I was termed out, and following that, parlayed the relationships and understanding of state government and working with elected officials again. Working with school board members, which is a pretty important role in our state. We've got about 1,800 locally elected school board members who really are the heart and soul of our communities. I got to travel to China in 2010 and host in Brazil. And finally, we've had several delegations that we've hosted here in Nebraska from Southeast Asia and Israel, among others. And the beard that you see, just a little bit about me, is unusual. I was telling my co-panelists, outside of my work in government relations, I do film and have to be growing my hair and beard out for a film I was cast in. We'll be filming here soon. So that's a little bit about me, and I'll kick it over to Chelsea.
Hello, everybody. I'm Chelsea, and thank you for the introduction, Ashley, and thank you so much to ACYPL for all that you do for building relationships across our country and other countries as well. And you all have been just a top-notch organization to work with and organizing us busy politicians. So thanks for the opportunity. I am in my second term at the school board in West Linn Wilsonville, and am the vice chair, which means that I assist the chair in developing the agenda and driving our meetings, but also I run the superintendent performance evaluation and contract negotiations. I do have 3 kids in our local public schools. I have one who's going to be a sophomore at Wilsonville High School, and I got a 2-for-1 the second time around. So I have boy-girl twins who are going into the 8th grade in a dual language, a Spanish immersion program in our local middle school. And yeah, I think that's enough for me. Thank you. I'll kick it over to Q.
And this is why you should not go last, because that is very hard to follow. So good afternoon, everyone. I am Q Phipps, State Representative of the 100 District here in Connecticut. We are equidistant between both Hartford, our capital, and New Haven, the home of Yale University. and also equidistance between Boston and New York City. I said this is my first term in the state legislature. Before that, I was a 4-year planning and zoning commissioner and 8-year city treasurer. So when I went to Russia, to the great cities of both Moscow and Ekaterinburg, I was the city treasurer, and also a parent advocate and director of advocacy and policy for excellence community schools, a blue ribbon school, which is one of the highest achievements you can get from the Department of Education, and the highest ranking school district in the state of Connecticut, which is the proud organization that I serve, and our scholars are doing phenomenally well. So with that, back to Ashley, right?
Wonderful. So Chelsea, Colby, I'm so sorry. We're going to get started with you. Can you tell us a bit more about your district and the other districts you represent?
I sure can. As you can see on the map here, Nebraska, we are in the middle of the country, and we're a very diverse state. Our state is divided up into 244 different school districts. To give you some perspective on the scope of our state, our largest school district has about 60,000 students. Our smallest has about 100. So we have districts of all sizes. Some of our students ride a bus because they live in a rural part of the state for over an hour to get to their building every day because they live in ranch country. Nebraska is heavily tied to agriculture, ranching. Beef production is a big part of our economy, and so that's where the kids live in a lot of parts of our state. And so to get to school, that's where they have to drive. I know you talked about equity a couple of town halls ago, and that's something we talk about in Nebraska quite a bit. Of course, from the socioeconomic perspective, but we have an equity issue in our state related to broadband and access to technology because of the ruralness of our state, and it presents some unique challenges for our local school boards to do. But that is our state in a nutshell. Hopefully you won't fly over. You're all welcome back to our state anytime.
Thank you,
I'll kick
Colby.
it to Chelsea.
Yeah, that's interesting to listen to, Colby. I would say that the spread of the size of our school districts is about the same in Oregon, with our largest being Portland Public Schools with, I don't know the exact number of students, but I know that our second largest school district has 45,000. And so I imagine Portland Public Schools has at least the 60,000. And we do have districts that go down as small as 100 or maybe even less. I represent West Linn, Wilsonville School District. West Linn, Wilsonville, those are two different cities. So our school district does span two communities, but we create one school community from West Linn and Wilsonville. We are in the South Metro area of Portland, Oregon. And we have just shy of 10,000 students. You can see a little bit about our demographics there. We do have a very good reputation. I like to believe we are the best school district in the state, according to the data that when you look at our graduation rates and our efforts in equity, we are consistently ranked very high in U.S. News and World Report and niche.com. You can see that we have a 95% graduation rate, and I'm proud to say that in the year 2025, we have declared a goal of having 100% of our students graduate. A couple of notable things about our school district are that one is that we have totally inclusive practices. And so we don't have any separate classrooms for special education. All of our students, regardless of their neurological abilities, are all in the same classroom. And we support all of our students to be successful in one mainstream classroom. And another notable feature is that we do have a dual language program. And so starting in kindergarten, our kiddos can enter this program. In the Wilsonville side, because we do have a large Latino population, it is half native English speakers and half native Spanish speakers. And they graduate totally biliterate. And it is a K through 12 program. And Yeah, I think that those are some of the key points. I think one more thing that I'd say that would be relevant perhaps later in our discussion is that because we have such a high achieving school district, our community has super high expectations of our students, our administrators, our school board, and that has definitely informed some of the ways we've approached the COVID-19 response when we hear from our community and what their expectations are of their schools. And I'll hand it over to you, Q.
So I like to paint a picture of what Middletown is. So my district is half of Middletown. We have 2 state representatives that represent the entire area. Our population is a little over 50,000. As I said, we're equidistant from the capital and from New Haven, which is where Yale University is. We are also a river town, and we are the home of Wesleyan University, which is considered a little Ivy. We want to go to the next slide. So once again, my district is a little over 25,000 now. It's grown over since this data was taken. Middletown, almost like the namesake, once again, not just middle as in distance or in between, but middle sometimes as in like average or median or representative and indicative. And our city, we'll say closely models, are very similar to the overall demographics of both our state and also our nation. Our population of Latinos or Latinx and Asian are a little bit lower than national averages, but generally speaking, fairly similar. So what happens in Middletown, and we have, by the way, what's voted the most romantic Main Street in all of the US, and it's also the whitest Main Street in all of the US. Literally what happens on our Main Street, typically it's indicative of what's happening throughout the entire state and what's happening throughout our entire nation. If you can go to the next slide, there we go. So the district that I represent has 2 extremes, once again, very similar to our country. We have those that have considerable means and fairly wealthy, mainly because we have several major employers. The hospital, Middlesex Hospital, which is the 3rd or 4th largest hospital network in the state. We have Wesleyan University, which is a major employer. Our city governments, both our Board of Education and the municipality. And we also have Pratt & Whitney, which is a jet engine maker, part of the UTC or United Technology Company, which is a major defense company for the US. So our median incomes or median household incomes are a little bit higher than the nation, to be frank, significantly higher than the nation, but our town and district has, once again, vast disparities between those that have and those that do not. And you'll see that also in the next slide when it comes to education. So generally speaking, once again, and we also have a community college. I forgot to mention the community college, not a major employer, but still a major asset for the town. We have significantly higher rates of higher education than what the rest of the state and what the population, or the overall population looks like. But once again, those disparities and differences leads to a lot of the inequities that we'll see and that we'll talk about as we discuss what's happening in our, what's moving forward after the COVID virus.
Great, thank you, Q. And again, thank you all for joining us and providing some insight into your communities. What will the upcoming school year look like for you all in your respective districts as you head back to school? And what are some of the state and local policies that are informing these decisions? Chelsea?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Our school districts in Oregon have an August 15th due date to let our constituents know what school will look like. But in Westland Wilsonville, we did already release our plan, because what we found is that a lot of parents they wanted to make decisions now. And in an effort to ensure that we keep our students in our public K-12 system and not lose them to private virtual online academies, we went ahead and released a plan. And there's a slide that will give some more information, but essentially there's 2 trajectories that students will be able to choose. One is an entirely distance learning track, and so it will model much of what we did the last few months of this recent academic year, fully online. We will be contracting with a company that handles online learning to help with the infrastructure and the curriculum, but it will all be taught by our licensed teachers, all of whom have master's degrees. And students who choose that trajectory will stay within the Westland-Wilsonville School District and will get a diploma, that's from the Westland-Wilsonville School District. This will be K through 12. And we're encouraging families, if they choose this program, to stay there. Because as you can imagine, it takes a huge amount of planning to figure out which teachers will be learning how to do this online, which teachers will be doing the place-based. Then we have a hybrid model. What we're hoping to do, in accordance with what experts recommend, you all probably saw the article came out with the American Academy of Pediatricians recommending that young kids go to school every day. We're going to do that. K through 4 kiddos are going to go to school every day. When they get older, grade 5, they're usually around the age of 10, and legally in Oregon could be left home alone. They will do the hybrid model like our secondary students, and that's going to look like probably an every other day going to school, because we're going to have to divide up classrooms and make our classrooms half the size of what they normally are. We measured all the classrooms, determined what would be a 6-foot distance, and we have all kinds of protocols in place. I think we'll talk about that a little bit later as far as policy coming out of the state that's mandating how we do this place-based learning. But I will say, just before we got on, I read an article in our Oregon Live, which is our state online newspaper. And the governor today issued what they're calling an ultimatum, but basically she said, Oregon, if you don't flatten the curve again, we're not going back to school in the fall. So wear your masks and stay out of, large indoor gatherings, because we're seeing COVID cases. They're growing unlike they have grown since we became responsive to the pandemic. So even though we've opened up and we have this plan to go back to school, what the data is showing us about the virus is that we're not going to be prepared to go back to school. So all of this thinking and planning is our best thinking for right now. And the truth is, we don't know in a month or a month and a half what exactly is going to happen. And I think, if I may just go ahead and touch on the other slide, and then I'll hand it over to my colleagues here. This just gives you a little bit of an idea about what our administrators, in partnership with our teachers, are planning. They have to consider all the public health protocols that are coming out of the Oregon Health Association, all the facilities and school operations. So if you can imagine, we have 3 high schools, 4 middle schools, 9 primary schools. All of those schools need to be assessed, measured, evaluated for flows of traffic, how you're going to serve lunches. We have to have a plan for how we're going to respond if there's a COVID outbreak. And that's just on the facilities and operational side there. Then you have all of the instructional issues, of which equity is at the core. And we talked about that in the last town hall, so I won't get into details a lot there, but we're going to be considering a lot of, the staffing issues. What does our community want? A community with very high expectations, how do we serve our teachers? And so, as you can imagine, it's very complicated to respond to the needs of all the different stakeholders and to come up with plans, very meticulous plans, in a state of very high ambiguity. So that's a little bit about what our school district is dealing with and how we can return to school in the fall.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of moving parts. Kobe, you represent a lot of different school board districts. What are the policies on the ground in Nebraska?
Well, we are a heavily local control state. We like to push everything down to the lowest level possible. And something that's been kind of interesting in our state is that we've got school districts and counties who've had 0 cases of coronavirus. Now, these are very rural districts, and what they're telling us is that they're going to be back to normal as if this has never happened. Now, those are very few and far between, but just to show you the range of what we're dealing with. The other thing that I thought was interesting, and I think Chelsea covered much of what we're dealing with here, is that we've spent so much time talking about safety of students, we've kind of lost sight of, well, what about the education of the students? We've become so focused on sanitation and masks and space that we've kind of forgot about the primary role, which is education. And so when we started to shift that way, our policy thinking, one of the things that we've highlighted and we've tried to push is that unfortunately, when children come back, whenever that is this fall, many of them will have been out of school for 6 months or so. And if you have a good, stable family, your learning continued. But if you did not, you haven't really engaged in education for half a year. And so what we've talked a lot about in our state is what kind of the massive amounts of assessment. And I don't say testing, because we're just trying to assess where kids are when they come back. Because unfortunately, we've got, like I said, a lot of kids who have not engaged in education. A sad statistic that came out of our state not long ago was the number of Child Protective Services abuse and neglect calls that were investigated has been cut in half or more. And unfortunately, that's not because those children weren't at risk or having abuse in their life. It's just that we have found out how important schools were to the protection of those kids as that first line of assessment and engaging law enforcement or social services in order to provide them the safety that we need. And so those are two of the policy areas that we're really focused on and thinking about. I think from our state's perspective, everybody feels like they've got the safety thing handled. That's all out there. What we're really trying to figure out is how do we catch kids up and try to make it as normal as possible.
That's a really good point. So and this can be an open question to any of you, as your students go back to school and we have the sanitation and safety under control, how do you begin to assess with your administrators and your teachers, how do they begin to assess the current needs of the students who are coming back from, economic challenges, say their parents have lost a home, or I know Stephanie in our previous town hall mentioned that some of the students are picking up shifts because, parents have lost jobs, or to Kobe's point, where they have faced abuse at home. So how are teachers now, as they begin to implement these new curriculums, how are they going to assess the needs of the students when they return back to the schools, or as Chelsea said, go and transition to a hybrid program?
I'll just say one thing and then I'll let them continue. But what we've asked for is grace, and that's the best word I can use from our state and federal policymakers. We've asked for flexibility and that grace to allow for assessment. We trust our teachers. We trust that they know what to do, but we've got to give them the time to kind of get reacclimated and virtually or physically touch those students, so to speak, to figure out where they are and then plan education from that point.
Thank you.
So I wanted to speak about, once again, two things: both the district that I represent as an elected capacity, but also my professional career as an educator for a school that's essentially a suburb of New York City. But overall in our state, we have over 160 plus municipalities. We have over 100 school districts, meaning over 100 different superintendents to serve less students than like LA Unified, the LA Unified School District, which is a lot of bureaucracy, which is a lot of replication, and it's very expensive, but also once again leads to tremendous amounts of inequity. Towns that are affluent and have high property values can tax and assess more to be able to get their students what they need. Other municipalities like my own that have significantly less taxable property, mainly because of our the nonprofit services that we have, with 2 community colleges, a hospital, so on and so forth. It makes it a lot harder to have a balanced budget to invest in our students the way that we should. So this is where I would say, before I start speaking specifically about the policies around getting our children back to school, this is where I would encourage. I said, if you are a woman and said that I'm not ready to run, or if you're a person of color and said that I'm not ready to run, I would encourage you to read the guidelines put forward by the State Department of Education and the governor's office to returning our children back into the school district. And it's so completely unrealistic. Things like having young children wearing masks all day. You can't get a 4-year-old or 5-year-old just not to touch the crayons on their desk, let alone not fidget with a mask for 8 hours in the school day. That's just not realistic. And I think so I bring up that to say that if we had more diverse perspectives, whether it's gender, whether it's race, whether it's occupation, if we had more educators making policy, would we get the results that we have today? And I think that question is we would have very different results. So the results that were put out from the state of Connecticut, as a matter of fact, I want to say yesterday or 2 days ago, I would say, and I'm being taped and recorded, that I don't think they're worth the paper that it's written on, because it's just so unrealistic. And I think Colby starts to bring up a point about like, what is education? And we have done a very good job of talking about the academics, but education is significantly more broad and comprehensive than that. Education is about the academic and scholarly work. Education is about being able to understand your world and your community around you. Education is about being able to build relationships with the people with you. It's a much more broader perspective than can you answer things on a test. And when you have very different interactions, and sometimes little to no interactions that we've had over the last few months, and then expect our children to then do well in the classroom, it's a fundamentally unfair expectation. So we're going to have to reframe that. And we are also going to have to reframe, because I'm pretty confident, especially when you look at some of the rising COVID numbers in other states, that we're probably going to be continuing distance learning. And having a shift with making parents understand and making the community understand, one, that education is not just a profession and a career, but it's an academic field and study, and it takes mastery and expertise to do that. So I think we finally might start to see teachers and educators and administrators as the experts that they are, because they have been undervalued for years, predominantly because of who's typically has been leading education, especially at the earlier education levels, women and people of color, when we were blatantly segregated. Not quite so much anymore, but definitely it's been a women-led field, which is why it's been undervalued. So I think we are going to start to see that parents in the community recognize that teaching kids is very difficult. And I will say, as someone that is not a classically trained educator, trying to teach a child to read is literally one of the hardest things that I've ever done in my life, to the point of impossibility. Because I didn't have the skills to understand all the different people. Like reading, you think is just like, okay, this letter, this sound, and especially in English, it's really, really difficult. So the point is that we're going to have a major shift in expectations. We're going to have a major conversation and change in the role of education. And we're also going to have clear role clarity on what are the expectations and commitments from educators, what are the commitments and expectations for children, what are the commitments and expectations for the community, for everyone in the entire educational process.
Right.
Is it okay if I continue with that conversation, Ashley, or would you like to ask the next question?
Go right ahead.
Okay. Well, just a few of the things that were said by the two of you, I just want to respond to. I mean, one is that, Q, I have had the same thoughts when I look at the directives coming out of the state and the things we need to implement in our schools to get the kiddos back. We are going to be encouraging masks, frequent hand washing, physical distancing, lunches to go instead of eating in a, cafeteria style. extensive considerations about airflow, and we've become a sanitary environment to bring kiddos back to school, and the truth is that we have to, because we have a teachers union who has an age, many of our teachers are of a certain age, it's more vulnerable, and if we're going to bring kiddos back to school and provide safe environments for our teachers, we have to respond to these directives coming from the state, as well as the fact that, Colby, you were talking about local control, and there's a lot of perks about local control, but for us to have any power at the state or federal level, then we as local school boards must be united. Because, if we're going to ask for funding decisions, based on standardized test, or the fact that we don't implement standardized test, then all of the local school districts in the state of Oregon doing the same thing gives us power. But if we started to have, Westland Wilsonville is doing one thing, and, but Portland Public Schools is doing a different thing, then we've just lost a lot of power. The one thing I would like to say too is that, childcare is a major issue. So if we're not going to have our kiddos going back to school, and we're going to look at things like equity, I heard the phrase good, stable family. Well, the truth is that there are some good, stable families that have one parent who has to go to work every day. And we have good, stable families that have two parents in the house that have to go to work every day, and there are essential workers, and those kiddos are home alone. If they're not going to school. And so we're going to have a child care crisis as well as an education crisis if we can't get our kiddos back in school.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to the circumstance that many people are facing across the country. I have a friend in the Fairfax County, Virginia public school system, and the teachers are very reluctant to go back to school because of the numbers within the county. And so she has to be at work every day and is like grappling with finding a way to continue to educate her children to the best of her ability, but understanding, like Q said, that her gift is not an educator, and doesn't want to do her children the disservice of, providing that education, but not being able to fully be there because she also has to work. So I think that is a really good, I guess, question that we're proposing now, because we want the children to go back to school. And if the state and the state health and our governors are saying that it's safe enough, having those teachers input on whether if they feel safe, especially like you said, Chelsea, for those who are in the demographics of 50 and older who are still presently teaching. So I know state governments and state legislature isn't the only institution, private or public, that is contributing to if students go back to school or the viability if they stay home. What do you think the role of corporations are in providing technology? Because I know Colby spoke to, he represents a lot of rural communities. How is the connectivity in some of those rural places? Hi, Colby, can you hear us?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't know if that was for me.
Yeah, how's the connectivity out in the rural communities if some of them decide to stay within their homes and distant learning?
It's incredibly poor. And one of the things that, I guess it's not a silver lining in this, but this is certainly the distance learning has certainly highlighted the inequities in our state. And our school board members were vocal about that. And I guess here's some good news. The federal government, through the CARES Act, did allocate money to all the states related to education, some directly to districts, some to governors for the purposes of education. Our state has decided to use the bulk of the governor's funding to buoy up and the infrastructure of to technology access, whether it be mobile hotspots, actual devices that students can use. But our rural school boards have been fighting for that for years, and it never became a priority until this year. And now we've got a unique situation where our governor is going to spend money on that. And our state, we're very appreciative of that. And we think, this COVID stuff will be gone, hopefully sooner than later. But now we've got an opportunity to really improve access through the technology. And we have had some private corporations step up. They haven't been as altruistic as you'd like them to think, but they really have been a partner with us. So we're excited about the CARES Act money has been huge for our state. We're doing things we couldn't have done without it.
Q, have there been any public-private partnerships within your communities that are supporting your education system?
So we'll talk about two things. One, the school that I work for, it's a charter school, and a charter school is a public school, but it has private management in the sense of we don't report to the Board of Education. We have our own board that we report to separately. And that school, because of the underfunding from the state side, if we didn't have private donations and supporters and investors, we couldn't actively run the school. And once again, it's just the highest performing school district in the entire state of Connecticut. But the one that I really want to talk about is the public-private partnership that just happened in Connecticut for the entire state for the public school system. And it failed miserably, where it got off the ground, they did their hiring, had a few months of meetings, and then immediately fired their director and dissolved the entire thing. So I think there's multiple roles that private industry would have in the education system, but the fact of the matter is that we really have to look at, well, one, they could pay their fair amount of taxes. I think that's the number one way that they can support public education. If we had a truly equitable and progressive taxation system throughout our country, I think that would be their best way to do their part. But what I think what we'll see is a calling on, especially those that you already have relationships with and as clients or you have contracts with, that what we should be doing moving forward is that there should be a clause in these contracts that there is some sort of give back or what's going to partnership. So it's not just a one-way street where we give money and we get a service, but they also have an investment in how well the materials that they provide actually help propel student achievement.
You know, if I may, I'd like to take this conversation just one step further. I mean, what we're seeing now that COVID brought us, and I do think it is a gift, is that it's shining a light on vast inequities between the haves and the have-nots. And that has to do with income, but it also has to do with where one lives. And what we're seeing is that the internet and communications companies have been privatized. They have very little obligation to the public. Unlike when telephone came about, and electricity and water, those were public utilities, and we can see widespread access across vast rural stretches of space where people have equal access to water, electricity, telephone. We don't have that for internet. And so when you talk about corporate responsibility, I think nowadays the internet is access to livelihood. The internet is access to looking for a job. It's access to paying your bills. It's access to education. I mean, this is a utility that needs to be a public utility and widely, and dare I say, free access to everybody in our country.
Yeah, I think a lot of corporations are realizing that many of the work, or a lot of the work that they thought needed to be done within the office can be translated remotely because we need to. We're in a state where we're finding new and different ways, just like ACYPL, where we're transitioning most of, if not all of our programs to virtual and still being able to have the connectivity, and we're finding it vital to sustaining our business. So yeah, I think that's really important moving forward for industries to recognize that it's imperative, just like water, just like any of the other needs that we have within our homes. So have you, for Oregon, I know you're going to be in a hybrid program. How are your students now? I know in our previous discussion, you talked about providing hotspots to them. Is everyone now connected, or as part of your hybrid implementation to continue to give those hotspots and laptops and assessing the needs as you continue? Or how is that funding going? Or is that going to be a part of the funding conversation a little later on?
Yeah. Well, I think, Q touched on it earlier when he said that the way that we fund public education through things like property taxes is one of the drivers of inequity. In Westland-Wilsonville, we have an amazing reputation for passing our capital bonds and local option levies. We pass it every single time. That local option levy gives us 80 additional teachers in our schools. And that capital bond just gave us $206 million to spend on building new infrastructure, buying technology. So in Westland-Wilsonville, everybody that didn't already have, broadband, high-speed Wi-Fi has a hotspot provided by the district. Everybody who needed it has a Chromebook. And so we have 100% connectivity from an infrastructure perspective, not necessarily from a parental support in the household, or if you start to talk about, kiddos with special education needs, the kinds of supports they have. But if we're just talking about hardware, nuts and bolts infrastructure, we're covered. My sister lives in rural Southern Oregon, and they're not covered. I mean, her school district is funded very differently. They have a very high need. Their community does not pass capital bonds and local option levies. They were not given devices. They were not given a hotspot. And so her kids in rural Southern Oregon are going to have a very different experience of distance learning than our kiddos here in Westland-Wilsonville. And the thing I think that's important to remember is that every single family, there might be one family somewhere, but other than that one family, every single family wants what's best for their kids. They want their kids to have a good education. They want access to, livelihood. And so, the fact that people live somewhere else or have a different level of access to these types of things it has nothing to do with, their level of desire or drive or motivation. It has to do with the way that our society and our infrastructure has been built.
So beyond the CARE Act, how has the economic downturn, because I know unfortunately, a lot of people have lost their jobs due to COVID. How is that translated into education funding for the upcoming school year? Have you all on a state and local level begin to discuss some of the implications of shrinking budgets or increasing budgets? What does that look like for your respective areas?
It's going to be devastating for our state. 50% of our state budget is education, K-12 and higher ed. So if you're losing state revenue, there's no way you can't make that up without touching education. And we have a real workforce issue that I think is going to be exacerbated here. You may have seen Nebraska just got recognized last week. We have the lowest unemployment in the state, which in most cases it is a good thing. People who want to work here are working, but we have an aging educational workforce who is probably not coming back, and then plus that they're not going to be taxpayers anymore from an income standpoint either. So we're going to struggle because of this, and we're not unique in that respect across the country.
Chelsea?
Yeah. Yes. I mean, we were told to build a budget on 17% reduction. That's, millions and millions of dollars. They told us, the state, that we need to budget. We're in the second year of a biennium. School budgets work with bienniums. And so we were told a year ago that we had a certain number of millions of dollars, and we budgeted to spend 49% of that, which is our practice, and then 51% the second year. So, to budget for a certain dollar amount in a biennium and to spend nearly half of what you think you're going to be told, and then in the second year be told 17% of your budget for the biennium is cut, that's a substantial cut. And so we're looking at, things like not replacing retiring teachers, reducing FTE, which is full-time equivalency. We cut our preschool program. because it's not a state mandated program. So we will not be doing preschool. We're doing things like cutting professional development days. We had a teacher mentor program that we're cutting. We cut principals' budgets. So we're in a cuts budget. And that's because, you know, we rely on the state largely. We have our local option levy from our local taxpayers, but otherwise we rely on the state to give us what's called an ADM, you know, for our students. And when we had an economy that was not generating wealth for several months, if you could think about the expense that the state acquired in helping people stay afloat, you know, things like suspending rent payments, increased access to food benefits, you know, the unemployment. Oh, in Oregon, we had an unemployment fiasco that included the director being fired by the governor. You know, people still haven't received money from what they applied for back in March. I mean, so it's a really complicated financial situation. Interestingly, when you leave a bunch of people at home, one of the places it turns out that they like to spend money is in marijuana dispensaries. So one of the industries where we actually generated more revenue was in the cannabis industry. We saw in Oregon sales skyrocket. And fortunately, we had already you know, decriminalized, legalized, and regulated that industry. And so all of that cannabis sale is actually being taxed, and that money will go into the state fund as well.
Hugh, from a legislator's perspective, what kind of conversations have you all been having? Are you all in session? Have you had any emergency sessions to discuss the new education funding budget?
Well, that's a fun question. So we ended our session. So typically our session, it's in 2 different cycles. The first year of the cycle is January to June. The second year cycle is from February to May. We essentially ended session in early March, like a week before March 14th, and then had no session days until the end of session, like literally no legislation passed at all. We are supposed to go back into session in January, in July, so in a week or two, to talk about COVID relief, police accountability, and elections. Because right now in Connecticut, if you are not sick or out of the state, you cannot have access to an absentee ballot. So we need to make provisions to change that so that we can actually vote in November without getting mass amounts of people sick or ill. Or at least put their lives in danger to vote, which doesn't seem right in the year 2020. With that said, we pushed back, like most of the country, the ability to file your tax returns. So we are looking at receipts to come, I want to say in July 15th, if I remember correctly, the July 15th or August 15th. So I want to say July 15th, if I remember correctly. And we are already expecting a $3 billion deficit than what we were anticipating, which means significant amounts of cuts. Now, mind you, over the years, we have already cut what some folks have said, we're not even in the muscle or fat anymore. We're not even at the bone anymore. We're talking the proverbial metaphorical, like severing limbs. Like this is going to be a very, very tough budget in education, or for everything, to be frank, which is scary because I think as Chelsea talked about, our Department of Labor, they saw in the last 3 months, typically what they see in 2 years, and the amount of people that have filed. So they are still significantly behind. They've caught up a little bit, but they are still behind. But they have been large proponents of saying that we need to invest in a human capital part of our state's infrastructure for years. And they've always said that they are down about 50% of the people that it would take in case of an emergency. So I think we have to fundamentally change how we're doing things. How that is going to impact education. So you've heard me mention the school that I worked for several times, the #1 school district in the state of Connecticut. If you had not heard me mention it for the first 3 times, there's one more time. The school wasn't always intended to be a pre-K through 8th grade program. This year, they eliminated, at least for 1 year, our pre-K program to save money. So not bringing in more students. Once again, to the highest performing school district in the entire state of Connecticut. But they have also denied our ability to go from kindergarten to 8th grade. So eliminating our middle school too. So if they, and by highest performing things, like here's some quick examples. 86% of our students are at grade level in mathematics. 95, I have it backwards. 95% of our students are at grade level in mathematics. 86% of them are at grade level in English language arts. Typically in an urban district or suburban district like ours, you would send out a press release if you had 40% or 50% of your students at grade level. And we are well above that. So our school district is performing very similar to some of the richest areas in the entire country. So Greenwich, New Canaan, Darien, it's where a lot of the investment bankers that work on Wall Street, they live in our state. And these very, very extremely wealthy neighborhoods and communities, and our school is even outperforming those schools, and they've eliminated it. So if they are willing to eliminate the ability to serve children from the highest performing school district, I am incredibly terrified of what they're going to be willing to do for special education students, for English language learners, and to be frank, for all of our metropolitan and urban cities. They've always been underfunded, and I have a feeling that they're going to be continued to be underfunded and underserved, and I have a significant problem and concern with that.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's a concern with, of course, like Chelsea said, everyone wants their children to do well. And as someone who doesn't have children, I want the people who will be taking care of me and who will be taking care of all of us and just trying to grow their futures to be well educated and have the ability to be successful and as they get older. So I think that's something that we're all going to have to be keeping our eye out for. I want to turn to, Chelsea.
Can I just say one thing also about what you said is that I've often heard that, we want the future of our country to be skilled, to take care of the next population and stuff like that. And let us not forget that a true, vibrant, healthy democracy relies on a literate populace. And so we need to have a population that can critically think, that can read and interpret text, that can formulate opinions, that can understand the complex system around them and make decisions based on accurate information and data. And so the vibrancy of our democracy rests on it, not just whether or not there's a skilled workforce to take care of me when, I'm in a nursing home someday.
Yeah, and just to be able to survive on your own. I know my generation with the fake news or just deciphering all these different media outlets and being able to decipher what is and what isn't relevant for you in your life, or what is and isn't real news in this digital era where everyone with a phone is a reporter or a journalist, and you have a lot of small to medium to large media outlets. It's just really important, like you said, to be able to have those abilities to analyze context and data in order to inform your vote, to inform the houses you buy, to inform the food that you give your children, and how to take care of yourself if you were ever to be sick, and being able to have those informed conversations with healthcare professionals. It's just really important for us to continue to invest in our education system. But I thank you for that cue. I know you all are going to continue to have those talks. And hopefully we can invite you all back so we can find out what happens at the end of this first school year. I just want to pivot quickly. We have a few of our audience members who have gracefully sent us some questions. So I just wanted to send some of those out. One question is, play isn't all fun and games. It serves as an important role in teaching kids how to interact with others, reach critical developmental milestones, and learn STEM and STEAM skills. How can schools continue to incorporate play into the curricula while social distancing and e-learning? Are they likely to stay, since these e-learning and social distancing are likely to stay for the near future? I open that up to anyone to...
Am I going to answer that first?
Sure.
There we go. So two-part structure to that question. So one, especially at the early education areas, I think in many times we often I don't want to say we overvalue play, but I would say that we undervalue academics in the sense of at pre-K and kindergarten, I think we could definitely be doing a lot better job at having children learn the skills to be able to learn the fundamentals, to be able to read and write, and just kind of like following the rules of like a classroom management and like what it means to be a student or a scholar. So sitting and being attentive, not talking when others are. I think we could focus on those skills while also engaging in play. Because the playing is where I said a lot of the communication skills are learned, setting boundaries, all really, really important skills. How to do that at the earliest education levels is a little different. It's very difficult, right? Like, how do you get a 4-year-old that doesn't know how to type, doesn't know their letters, to be able to perform on a computer? That can be difficult, which is actually one of the reasons why the school that I worked for was amendable to eliminating the pre-K program, because they couldn't efficiently execute its model with pre-K 4 students if we don't have the children in front of us. That's just very, very difficult for what they're trying to teach. For the later grades, I think what we can do is, because I think we've often overvalued play in the sense of physicality, right? Sports is often used, physical education in gym and throwing balls and that sort of thing. It's often how we have used play to teach. I think what we can do is start to be, and I'm going to get to my geeky side for a second, using whether it's video games or role plays, not necessarily Dungeons and Dragons, but just once again, vast amounts of Euro gaming, Settlers of Catan, once again, huge things that we can use to teach kids the same things: how to communicate, rules, mathematics and strategy, so on and so forth. And our school has actually started to do that, which I'm really, really proud of, in using online gaming platforms to make sure that kids are still building relationships.
Yeah. And I think we just have to get really creative. I know, again, to refer back to my friend and her children, their schools decided to do like an online yoga. So to see this 4-year-old perform these like yoga poses that he learned that day is really great, and to see his other classmates interact. So I think, like you said, you're gonna have to figure out how to do it in an academic standpoint to make sure that they learn these skills and to be creative in that sense, but then also to do it in a physical way for students who are able, so that they can begin to stretch and make sure that they're still using those motor functions. But like you said, it's going to be really interesting to figure out how they can have those communication skills, if they're an only child, or you can't play with the kids in the neighborhood and have that, have to have that social distancing. So it's going to be really interesting to see how they figure that out. Another question we have is, my wife is a teacher in Fairfax County. Oh, shout out to Virginia. And the tentative CPS reopening plans does not make us confident that it will be safe for teachers and students. What are the things that school districts must do to ensure that teachers and students are safe?
I'll pop in here, unless Colby, I know I've been talking more, so if you, okay. This is a fascinating COVID question, one that I've been really considering with friends, is that this time is calling on us. Q was talking about learning communication skills and boundaries. That's what COVID-19 is bringing us. We all need to be able to make decisions about our comfort level, our risk tolerance, be responsible for our own behaviors, and communicate our boundaries. And so giving options and not being punitive if people choose an option that works for them. So for example, a teacher needs to decide if they can do distance learning or place-based. And that'll be based on their risk tolerance and, their bubble that they want to create. And the same is true with our families. Each individual family needs to decide. If we go back to school in a hybrid model, they get a choice. Do they want to do all distance learning, or do they want to come back into school? And then there'll be 1,000 little choices in between that have to do with whether or not you wear masks, whether or not you wash hands, what you do with your free time, how often you go to the grocery store, do you go to the family reunion or not? And all this is embedded in, knowing my own personal boundaries, knowing yours, and us being willing to be responsible for our choices and make informed choices. It's really what it'll come down to.
I agree. Any last statements from our panelists before we conclude this town hall?
Thank you, ACYPL.
Thank you. And I just wanted to say to our audience, thank you for joining us for this 3-part series. I've had a wonderful time learning about our education system and all of the things that our districts across this country are going to be dealing with and grappling with as they return to the classroom. As our exchange work transitions to virtual engagement during the COVID-19 pandemic, it's vital that we measure the impact and effects of our virtual town hall series for our funders. We seek to do this via a short exit survey that will ask you all to take note of on one key takeaway that you learned from this session, in addition to a few other questions. Zoom attendees may view the survey link on the Zoom post attendee screen and will also receive it in their email tomorrow. Viewers on Facebook Live and YouTube can find the survey link in the video description on the respective platforms. I'm sorry. Thank you in advance for taking the survey and helping us to measure the impact and our programmings during this time. So if you just want to say one thing that you learned, let us know how your communities are being impacted, and something that you want to see next time that we do this town hall. I hope that you all tune in again as we continue these town halls and just engaging and learning about all of the different things that affect all of our communities across this nation. So again, I thank you so much to our panelists, Chelsea, Q, and Kobe. I hope you have a wonderful 4th of July weekend.
Independence Day, everyone.
Thank
Bye,
you.
Q. Bye, Colby. Bye, Ashley.
Bye.